Hello everyone, today we are here at the Luftwaffenmuseum Gatow with Flo from the Great War.
Also from the Great War, but now also from 16 days in Berlin. Yeah.
And you probably wonder why there's a glass behind there, because Bismarck is actually currently filming the MiG-29, and if we would talk down there in front of the Focke-Wulf 190 or the 111, we would interrupt his recordings. So we went up here, where you don't have the best sound system, but well, it's his day, not ours. But anyway, why Berlin and why the Battle of Berlin?
Berlin is a very simple answer. Berlin is my hometown. Like, not as in I live here for a few years, but I'm born here. I was born in '87, technically in a country that doesn't exist anymore. In the wonderful East Berliner, yeah, in the wonderful district of Pankow in the north, near the hospital where Hitler's body was autopsied. Fun fact. And you know, as you even you know, people all around the world know Berlin is a city full of history. You know, they have the wall and the airlift, and you know, nowadays it's a hip city with like clubs and skyrocketing rents and stuff like that. But what most people don't really know, I think, is that what effect World War II had on the city, and specifically the last few weeks of the war had on the city. Because when I was growing up in a Berlin that was much emptier than it is now, there was, for example, it was common to use the word Kriegslücke, which means war gap, which is, you can see them nowadays if you know where they look, is basically house, gap, house, and the gap is house-sized. So that means that
the house was destroyed.
It was destroyed either during the fighting in April and May '45 or by air raids, which was also very common. And if you see the pictures of, for example, also, you know, just simple things like we have a big park in the city center around the Reichstag, which is Tiergarten, and all the trees in Tiergarten are around 75 years old, because they, because when you read about the war and the last stages of the war, what did the civilians need? Trees, forest to survive the winters. Everything. And also trees are, in a military sense, something where an enemy can hide and everything. So a lot of it was cut down, and it was just an open green ground in big parts, like especially in front of the Reichstag and everything. And I think from this kind of personal interest of my hometown, I kind of, and then I realized when you watch a modern World War II documentary, it's like, okay, we spent 30 minutes on Normandy, and I don't know what, Stalingrad is big and it's long and important. There are important things, and then it's like, oh, but this is TV and we only have 45 minutes or 90 minutes, and then but then the TV editor, chain smoking, says, oh yeah, but we also need to talk about Potsdam conference and you know, how the Cold War started. Okay, but then we can't.
The Battle of Berlin, everything was lost anyway.
Yeah, the Russians came over the Oder and just basically drove their tanks right to the Reichstag. That's what happened. But it's like 2.5 million Soviet soldiers, 2.5 million civilians still left in the city, few 10,000 last remaining soldiers from the Wehrmacht, Volkssturm, everything that they still had on a relatively small area. So it's like a gigantic battle, and I think also from that military perspective, it's very interesting.
Yeah. I think I sent you some notes, like the Kriegsmarine still flew or drove in some recruits into the Battle of Berlin. Actually, I can't remember, a few months ago or something, when you mentioned the first time that the project will be, I stumbled across something in reading, which I usually do, and then I send it out.
Yeah, and there's, Chris Bismarck will take a look at everything that happened in the skies.
I probably will look at the Volkssturm. I'm not entirely sure yet, but very likely, because I actually got some books on this and I want to take a look how it's going on, and this would fit perfectly in here, I think.
Yeah, it does fit, and this is one of these topics which is super crucial in understanding the late war, in understanding from a pure military sense, because what happens to fighting if the enemy or one faction is barely organized militia forces without any training, but you give them Panzerfausts, or if you put them 2 Panzerfausts and put them on a bicycle and have them ride to the front line with a bike. And I think this this kind of phase of warfare is very
especially how they were used, because there was active. I'm not entirely sure if they were declared a militia or not, because there was actually quite some discussion. I think Guderian wanted something like a militia, the Landsturm, but they went actually against it. But lately, when they used it in a certain way, actually similar to militia, it was useful. And also they were used as well, for instance, like to free up Wehrmacht soldiers on other parts of the front. So in some cases they could be effective, but usually were not particularly combat effective. But there were also cases like this, but this is only preliminary information, only from the little bit I picked up a few weeks ago, because the last few weeks, as many of you know, I was just
quite busy.
I was from Ohio to the Ostwald basically, and now back in Berlin the second time in less than a week.
As we say in Berlin, Rom, Paris, Erkner.
Rome, Paris?
Erkner. Erkner is a suburb of Berlin, and we say when you travel around a lot, you travel from Rome to Paris to Erkner.
Okay, Erkner. Never heard of this actually. I think I know Spandau and many other places, but Erkner.
Erkner is basically directly on the other end. And,
East Berlin.
East Berlin, yeah.
Okay,
Outskirts of East Berlin. Yeah, and I mean, I think we have the Volkssturm, you have the Flakhelfer and the flag towers in Berlin, and you have regular troops, so you have the SS volunteers, you have all the civilians in it, you have the Russian army, you have the Russian Secret Service. I know one story I just stumbled upon now, I need to investigate a bit more, is like how Beria and the NKVD were really going for the uranium that was stored in the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physics, which is in southwest Berlin. And I think it's like this microcosm where all these kind of things were culminated, in terms of like the culmination of World War II, but also of course in terms of starting the Cold War.
I mean, and also you have the flag towers here, and from what I remember, the flag towers in Berlin were the first ones, then they built the one in Hamburg, and the final version were built mostly in Vienna. So, and I covered the Vienna flag towers.
Watch this video, very good.
So, point somewhere here, yeah. And these were the final versions. They were more optimized than the Berlin flag towers. I think were the very basic ones where they basically tried out stuff and then determined, okay, that's actually not the best solution. They're not the most effective, but they're still there mostly, I think.
Yeah, and I mean they took part in the battle, and it's like, I mean, we went to Przemyśl, famous Austro-Hungarian fortress ring town built in the late 19th century.
Isn't it Przemyśl?
No, Polish people told me it only has 2 syllables, and they only laugh when we Westerners try to pronounce it with 3 syllables.
So basically, Przemyśl is the Austrian version of
Przemyśl.
Przemyśl. I butcher every pronunciation, so it doesn't matter.
It's also a very good word for Polish people to get a laugh from us.
Yeah.
But you have this city, and then you have a fortress ring around it. That's like how fortifications, 19th century fortifications work. And I mean, in a sense, the flag tower is like basically on the same line as like a gigantic fortress kind of thing that can also shoot in the air, and also took part in ground battles. And you just put an obstacle into a city, and then I mean they weren't probably. I mean they had bunker functionality as well.
Yeah, they had at least in Vienna they had some civilian, also production stuff in there.
Yeah.
But I think they were never intended for being used in ground combat. So,
Exactly.
And the thing is, why they were basically around the city center was because the bombers always evaded the big bomber formations. But for the final, like, I don't know, probably 10 kilometers or 20 kilometers, they had to fly in a straight line. And this is why these bunkers to a certain degree made sense, that you can concentrate the fire at the bomber formation when it can't evade anymore, because the bombing computer was trying to calculate the perfect spot to drop the bombs.
Yeah. Because
this was some people get wrong, and the reason why they also built in there is because to be higher up above the houses of the city. And because somebody asked why not build it on a regular building, because if you build them on a regular building, it usually will collapse.
Yeah, and also I mean in terms of like ammunition logistics,
Yeah,
you want to have an ammunition
that
lift
stuff.
and this kind of thing.
So these were quite complicated. Usually, do you have also in the Berlin towers, were they always twin, so that you have a command tower and a combat tower, or is it differently here?
I think it's different here. I think it's just one structure.
Okay, for instance, in Vienna, you have always two towers. One command tower, which basically with the radar and everything, and one combat tower with all their guns.
Yeah, this is, I mean, you know, if I'm wrong here, this is of course something we will talk about in the documentary, because these towers were they took part in battle and you know, were quite important also in that improvised shelter functionality.
I think the Berlin towers are way bigger. I think they're still quadrangular, and for instance in Vienna, the combat towers were round, and you had 4 in the upper parts. But the command towers were usually a rectangular shape, and I think the Berlin towers are way bigger rectangular shapes, and likely in the middle there was the command element, but then they figured probably out that this likely the firing interfered probably with the radar and the command facilities, because they were also placed, I think, a few hundred meters from each other, that they don't interfere with each other. I think also due
to... that sounds like the kind of thing you figure out after testing out the first version, like Kinderkrankheit.
Yeah. Teething problems.
Yeah, and and you know, as I said, like Berlin is full of all these kinds of stories. We have great primary sources from the civilian side. Covering the German side is a challenge, but it's possible. You know, there has been some research work on that, and there are some primary sources you can count on. I mean, even though the situation was very chaotic. We will, you know, and the really cool thing is that this is the first time that, you know, we went to other battlefield tours, and then usually I have to go with a guide and basically take him by this word. But here I already have like a rough knowledge of cool spots that I think are interesting, and it's just like it's so different to film somewhere where you already know the geography and know your way around, and then you get a very different understanding of a battle if you know about the geography and everything. And you don't just have to guess where that village is that you read about, but where we actually know that it's in that direction.
And it's also very important that you are native speakers, for most parts of the team, because recently actually we encountered some errors from non-native speakers where they made various errors in translating stuff that in at least one case had quite tremendous conclusions in the wrong direction, which probably will be covered at another point, but Roman Töppel found this out, and I think he should be covering this, because it's also a very delicate topic. So
yeah, it is. And not only do I speak German, I also speak Berlin, you know, which of course makes it easier to get access to certain points and everything, because
and I can speak Austrian. I can scream at people.
You will be part of this. Chris, who's outside.
From Bismarck Military Aviation History, because he has 3 names now.
Yeah.
Because one wasn't sufficient.
Yeah, very, very easy to remember. He will be part of this. We talked to Ralf from the Deutsches Panzermuseum Münster, where you were just yesterday.
Yeah, we were just coming back, so yeah.
He will help us, because he already highlighted in like the early talks we had a lot of the things we just touched upon, like how challenging but not impossible it is to cover this.
Do you know was the Sturmtiger used in the Battle of Berlin?
A Sturmtiger or
one or more?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think so. I think the Tank Museum, which will also be part of it, I think they recently had a video, and I think it only served on the
Warsaw,
on the Western Front.
Wasn't it used? I thought it was used at the Warsaw Uprising, but it could be terribly wrong here. But I found something interesting in the archives about the Sturmtiger, and I don't know. I forgot on Stahl auf der Heide. I didn't have time to ask Ralf about it actually, but I filmed some stuff with the Sturmtiger. If I do the video, I also need to check if the source is good enough. But I think it could be very interesting.
Yeah, I think generally, as a last thought. Why are we working with 2 tank museums on this? The tank played a very important role in this, and it's I mean, for the Russians, it's an unusual situation because urban combat in such a big city with tanks was still, I would say, a somewhat unusual situation because of the, you know, you can't really maneuver that much and everything. And they developed certain tactics and modifications, self-built modifications for the T-34.
The bed springs or something.
Exactly. And I mean, on the German side, of course, it's interesting because if I remember, my source here is Beaver now, I think there was something like, at some point they collected all their tanks the Germans had left in the city center at Tempelhof Airfield to refuel, and they had 60 tanks, and it was like, I think various, like Tiger 1, Tiger 2, some Stuks, and yeah, it's everything that they could throw together. And then, of course, that makes it interesting. Okay, you can probably somewhat follow individual tanks and track what they were doing. And then you had other operations, for example, south of Berlin, the so-called Cauldron of Halbe, Kesselschlacht von Halbe.
Encirclement.
Where the tank and the armored vehicles and any vehicle that they still had was basically an ambulance and an escape vehicle. And I mean, the tanks had a psychological role in terms of like, for, you know, of course everybody wants to have a tank as a defense mechanism, but the last gasoline that you don't use to attack. The last gasoline you have is to drive backwards.
In this case, yeah.
In this case, and everybody who can grab on will grab onto it, and you will just use it as a transport vehicle. And I think this is a kind of a very different use case, of course, for something like a Tiger tank.
Yeah. I mean, in this case, I think there's one anecdote of I'm not sure, I think it was a German politician or something. He had like, I think it was about the Halbe encirclement, that he had like encountered German general staff officers coming towards him out of and they had the machine gun, the submachine guns around their necks, basically. So the greatest officers, highest grade, officers come around basically with close combat because they're breaking out, because it was that desperate at this point.
So, and of course, that's like kind of fascinating. And this is also something that we want to look into with the Tank Museum together. They have a great collection.
Yeah.
And Ralf will offer us, from the Deutsches Panzermuseum, will offer us some research guidance on that and everything. So I hope that we kind of summarize this topic somewhat interesting, and I could convey why I found this topic fascinating. And
as you said, that's the thing. If you do something in Germany or Austria, we like to do it thoroughly.
Yeah, very thoroughly, of course. And we're still raising funds for it. Every donation that, I mean, we have a goal set for the minimum viable documentary that we can make, but every donation that comes on top of that will just make it a better documentary and will allow me or you or the other people that work on it to spend just a little bit more time on it. And
like a trip to Freiburg Military Archive to check everything what is in Berlin there. I mean, we did a trip for 3 days. I think in July or something. There's some videos out there, and you need a lot of time to just look at what is in there, because sometimes I was like, oh my god, this will be amazing, and then nothing was in there, or it was like, okay, that's not, for instance, the German data on tanks, on foreign, it was basically the basic information and just one sentence on classification. I was like, oh, what were they thinking about? Nope, no information in there. The same could happen to you, so you spend 1 day and suddenly you have some folder where you think, oh, that's not that important, and suddenly it's a treasure.
Yeah. So I think this will be exciting, and I think we will probably have some more interviews in the future where we can maybe explore some other aspects the deeper we dive into this.
Yeah, definitely. So big thank you here, Flo.
Thank you for having me.
And also big thank you to the Luftwaffenmuseum at Gatow for having us here. And well, thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye.